healthy economy can only emerge where there's a strong moral foundation upon which to build it. And so for those that think that we can bypass these issues and that we're going to still have a healthy economic system are deluded, sadly. And that's where we're at.
Hello and welcome to the March or Die show. Today, this is the show where every episode I do my very best to give you the principles and perspectives you need to march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die. There are so many issues that jump up in front of us that really work against us to prevent forward movement. And we need to understand how we can move forward in spite of what may be happening in our lives or what has happened in our lives, those things that hold us back. And today's show is no different. Very excited about the guests that we have on today. Before we jump into that, however, I will encourage you, if you have not yet subscribed to the show, please do that right now. Go ahead and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening from. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed there as well. But we want to make sure that you have access to all of these episodes as soon as they come out. So I want to make sure you're subscribed, and then take some time and go over to marchordie.com. Marchordie.com is our website, archived episodes, information about the show. Our store is there. All of it's there. Go ahead and check that out. Today's episode is maybe a little bit different than typical. I don't know how different, probably, but a little bit different than typical. My guest today is Jason Storms. Jason is the CEO of Operation Save America. He is leading that organization, incredible organization with a long history, really addressing the abortion issue in the United States and doing such incredible work. Operation Save America. If you're not familiar with them, please go to their website. And Jason, at the end of the interview, talks about all the places that you can go to learn about him, learn about Operation Save America, the work that they do. But for decades, they have been engaged in this fight against abortion. And you'll hear Jason talk about kind of where they came from, kind of where the abortion fight came from, where it is now, how they address it. But one of the things I appreciate about him and the organization, their ministry, is that they don't just do the work of trying to persuade people who are already in the process of getting an abortion to stop. They do that work. They go to abortion clinics and they do all of the things that you would typically associate with an organization like ours. But they understand, and fundamentally, and he does such an incredible job of articulating this through this interview, they understand that the real fight is in fostering a revival through our local churches, supporting those who have made decisions to end pregnancies, really discipling and training, mentoring young men to be the leaders in their homes and in their communities that they're called to be. That is the answer to these issues that we are dealing with in our culture, issues like abortion. And he does such a great job articulating that, has a wonderful personal story, a story of redemption, a story of God's working in his life. So very, very grateful to be able to have him on today, and would encourage you after this episode to go and check out the work that they are doing. But without further ado, we'll jump into this interview with my guest, Jason Storms. Jason, thank you for coming on. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure to be with you, Jeremy. Thank you so much.
We've rescheduled a couple times, but we made it happen. And so in spite of our technical ineptitude, I don't know if that's a real word, but we still pulled it off. So here we are. And really appreciate you doing this. We're going to talk about a lot of things today and really some very critical issues. In fact, I would argue, and I've said this before, that probably the issue I care about the most outside of, the gospel and, I guess I would say my faith, but faith, right? The issue that I care about the most would be the issue that we're going to talk about today, abortion. And you spend so much time talking about this and addressing it. And I appreciate how you address it. And I want to get into all of that, but I'd love to hear your background first. Talk to us about, kind of your upbringing, your background, and what pushed you specifically into where you are in the organization that you run.
Yeah, great questions. And, this issue definitely was personal for me. So I grew up in a broken family. My mom and dad were teenagers, had me and my brother. My mom was pressured to abort, and thank God she didn't. Wow. Even though she was very liberal, she claimed Bill Clinton was the greatest president our country ever had, but she said, I couldn't go through with killing my children. And even though she was very pro-choice. So I'm thankful for that. God's providence there that my brother and I are here. And my dad, when I was little, became a Christian and then actually ended up becoming a pastor in New Orleans for many years. And so, but my mom raised us. We were all from upstate New York. And then we moved to California. I graduated high school in San Jose, California. And so I'd visit my dad, spent some time with him, but we were a lot of years, we were sort of estranged from each other. And so I had a little bit of Christianity in me, but at 14 years old, I renounced Christianity sort of officially. And so just said, I don't believe this stuff. I had a lot of questions that weren't being answered. And of course, the lust of my flesh is 14-year-old, raging hormonal young man. And so, it was high school was just a spiral downward. Then I was probably more mature at 14 than I was at 18. And so drugs, partying, sexual debauchery and all that sort of thing. So I wound up basically after high school in San Jose, homeless and just a bum, couldn't hold on a job and, a lot of drugs and partying, and had a girlfriend that got pregnant, had an abortion. And I remember the conversation very vividly. She calls me and says, "I'm pregnant." And I said, after a long pause, "Well, what are you going to do?" And, she knew exactly what that meant, that I was putting the responsibility on her. What are you going to do? This is not my problem, right? Was my answer there. And how pathetic, right? That me as a young man was so selfish, right? That I wanted all the privileges and benefits of this woman's body, but had zero ability or concern to take care of her heart and the responsible decision making that comes with having sex, right? Sex is by definition a reproductive act, right? Sex is short for sexual reproduction. It is fundamentally and primarily an act of human reproduction. The pleasure benefit is secondary, right? Much like eating. You think of eating. We some people say they don't eat to live; they live to eat, right? But the reality is, we all need to eat to live, right? And we have to have some considerations about proper nutrition, or we're going to have what we have in our culture: an obesity crisis, health crisis, and people that are sick in all kinds of ways. And so, the primary purpose of eating and our biological function of our bodies, it's all designed for us to get and acquire nutrients into our system. Now, pleasure is a part of that, and we spice up our food and we like varieties of food and so forth. But, so what we've done in our culture over the last 60 to 80 years, right, with the sexual revolution and sort of the secularization of our culture, is we have created an environment where sex, the idea of casual sex, has just been marketed aggressively to young people. And there's no boundaries, there's no responsibility, and there's no virtuous love and sacrifice. And so, of course, a lot of men like that environment, right? A lot of men love abortion. They love the fact that they can eliminate their child, terminate their pregnancy with little consequence, and be free to indulge their sexual appetites. But, it's disastrous for our culture. It's disastrous for young people. And it was disastrous for my girlfriend at 18 years old. It devastated her. She went ahead and had the abortion. And I actually never saw her again. She was from a strict Japanese family. And I think they found out about it. And I never saw her again. And it was not long after that I ended up actually leaving California. And my dad reached out to me. And I had very little communication with him since I was 14 and actually lived with him in New Orleans. And he said, "Jason, I want to rebuild our relationship. I'm sorry I haven't been there for you as much as I'd like to be, but I want to give you an opportunity to get a fresh start, get a roof over your head, and get into a better place. And I'll buy you a bus ticket and come down here to New Orleans." And so I thought about it, and it didn't take long that God was drawing me. I was coming to the place of realizing that I was a sinful mess. I was very much searching for spiritual answers and truth. I'd get out in the mountains and drop acid and meditate out in the trees and hike through the trees and stuff and do some weird stuff, getting into some weird new age stuff. But I was searching for why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? I'm not just going to conform and go to college or get a job and just, make money, grow old and die. I want to know what the purpose of my life is. Why are we here on this planet? And sadly, not many of my friends really wanted to have those conversations, and so I was very much sort of searching. And so I moved to New Orleans with my dad. I hopped on a bus, spent 4 days on a Greyhound bus, reflecting on my own sinful condition. God was convicting me tremendously and just drawing me to himself. And first night I got off the bus, my dad had a little apartment in New Orleans, and they were in a Bible study. And I just was so moved by the people their sincerity, their genuineness, their love, their concern, and open up the scriptures. And then my dad had a little Bible that I'd had from when I was a kid down there with him, and I began to open it up, and the words just jumped off the page, like a starving soul,
Yeah.
And just I realized that everything I've been really searching for in terms of, why is my generation so messed up and confused? Why is there so much brokenness and dysfunction in my culture and generation and in my life? And realized, that what the missing component is Christ. I mean,
Yep.
Christ is everything. He's the foundation of it all. And there was a time that he was the example for young men, that Christ was front and center for young men in this country as they were developing into manhood, that Jesus was the standard and he was the example and the model. And of course, he has been replaced over the last 100 years with pop stars and rappers and you name it. And we're in a more moral and spiritual crisis, in a crisis of masculinity as a result. And so my life was radically changed. I took a couple of weeks, me arguing with my dad and not asking questions. How do you know the Bible's true, and why would God make the world and send all these people to hell, and these kinds of questions. And he just patiently walked me through these things, and we began to have these conversations. And took me to church, and the presence of God overwhelmed me, and my sinfulness overwhelmed me, and gave my life to Christ. And my questions were being answered, and intellectually was making sense to me, and my life was radically transformed at 19 years old. And then my dad began to take me out to do pro-life ministry, took me out to an abortion clinic where we stood out in front with signs, and we pleaded with the moms going into the building, and just watched women sitting in the parking lots, oftentimes with men that were dragging them in there, weeping, and just began to see the brokenness, watching women come out of that clinic, having walked in there with a little life inside of them, having walked out now holding their stomach, being helped into a vehicle, and just realizing, what is taking place with abortion. I began to research it, of course, study embryonic development, study the scriptures, and of course, overwhelmingly, the scriptures affirm the humanity and the value and the worth of preborn children.
Right.
Anywhere that a pregnant mother is talked about, the humanity of the child is a part of that. And so, technology now being what it is has given us this profound insight into the womb, where we can look into the beauty in the development of these earliest stages of human life and human development, and what a miracle and what a beautiful thing to celebrate, and what an ultimate betrayal, right, to kill that innocent child. So my heart was very convicted, on that issue, and very moved. And I said, I've got to get involved and work with this. And so oddly enough, there was a ministry there that actually, some of the guys that got my dad involved were local chapter leaders for a ministry called Operation Save America. And they had been ministry Operation Rescue. And Operation Rescue was a big leader nationally in the late 80s with the rescue movement, where there were peaceful sit-ins and acts of civil disobedience, where Christians just sat down and peacefully prayed at the doors of abortion clinics. Hundreds of thousands of arrests for that. And it was the largest movement in this country of civil disobedience, larger than the civil rights movement. Hundreds of thousands of Christians were involved in the rescue movement in the late 80s, early 90s. And when Bill Clinton was elected in 1982, that all sort of was crushed by him, with making that a federal felony. And the movement kind of fell apart. And 1992 was a difficult year for the pro-life movement for a variety of reasons. But so the Operation Rescue was a leader at getting the church onto the front lines of this fight, and equipping the church to think biblically and take action. And it became Operation Save America under the leadership of a guy named Flip Benham, who was the guy that actually led Jane Roe in the Roe versus Wade case, led her to Christ, Norman McCorvey. Yeah. And Flip's been a faithful leader for many years. He passed that baton to one of my mentors named Rusty Thomas, who led the Operation Save America faithfully. And that's when I got involved in the ministry around 2014, began to really work a lot with them. And eventually took the organization over 3 years ago. And it's been an adventure. It's a spiritual battle. Yeah. It's an intense battle, I can tell you that. But I'm standing on the shoulders of giants who've gone before me. And it's a great heritage. It's a great ministry that, as I said, has been on the front lines of this fight for decades, equipping the church to fight this battle biblically.
Yeah, man, that's incredible. What an incredible story too. So when you went to New Orleans, however you say that, right? New Orleans. And you met with your dad, you accepted Christ, you started going to the abortion clinics and those kind of things. Having come from a place where you encouraged your girlfriend to do that, and your background, Was that something you sat down and talked to your dad about, that you shared with him that you had been through this? How did you process that personally?
My life was so ravaged by sin, right? I mean, as a young man, I was so much, right, that was ashamed of, right, that I had just devolved into, when you get into the drug culture and you're
Sure.
addicted to drugs. I mean, your moral compass and your self-awareness, right, your ability to see yourself really gets woefully skewed, right? And so I was just tremendously broken, over my sin, and God just laid me, but that was replaced with this tremendous joy. So, I think that God just, the radical process of regeneration, I had this tremendous joy in my heart. It
Yeah.
was kind of like, what could I possibly, what could I possibly be upset about?
Hmm.
I mean, I have a relationship with the creator of the universe. He saved me. And what could possibly upset me, right? I mean, I had this peace and this joy and this fervor and this zeal, and so I had my dad and I would talk real transparently about that stuff. And he came from a very similar background. Like I said, he and my mom, they were, teenagers.
Sure.
He was a drug dealer in Elmira, New York. And he was, came from a Sicilian family, and he was the first one that sort of left the Catholic Church and became a, born again Christian.
Yeah.
And but so so he had his, he had his own. He could relate to my struggle. And, of course, he had
Yeah.
prayed for me for many years, knowing the path that I was on. And so, I mean, he and I really became just best friends in some ways, and he was just a great mentor to me in that time. And we became like best friends. And he just patiently mentored me and discipled me. And I was fired from every job I had before I was a Christian, and
Hmm.
as a teenager. And after I became a Christian, I got promoted in every job I got, and quickly began to excel at work and wanted to be productive and responsible, and in figuring out how to be a man. So
Yeah.
so my dad was instrumental in that. It was a great
That's good.
blessing to have that relationship.
When we talk about the issue of abortion, it's kind of it's like, I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but it's fascinating to me to watch or listen to people talk about this issue, because to me, and I think to a lot of people of faith, Christian people, we would say that really the only answer, it's not less abortion is no abortion, right? Because it is um, it's killing a human life. It's killing that which is created in the image of God, and all of those things that we could talk about. And so the fact that this issue has been kind of thrown into the social issues category in our country, to me, is again fascinating. I don't even know how to process it or how to think about it. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why has it become a social issue? And there's all these issues we talk about, and we say, well, that's a social issue, or that's a political issue, or something. And so a lot of church people won't talk about it. A lot of Christian people won't talk about it. But there seems to be a bit of a shift now, even amongst those who would be secular, kind of non-Christian, whatever, people of faith, people who don't go to church or whatever, but now starting to look at even just the science, right? And going like, wow, okay, so now we know there's a heartbeat at 6 weeks, I think it is, or 7 weeks, right? And so if we keep pushing that back, and technology continues to get better, what are we going to continue to learn? So more and more, you even hear secular people saying this is something that we should not participate in. Why is it a social issue, and how do you address that when you're talking to um, maybe church people, but people outside of the church?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, the scripture says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that there is a profound lack of knowledge about what abortion is and what it is that we are talking about. And sadly, a lot of that ignorance and lack of knowledge starts in our pulpits.
yeah,
How many pastors are preaching and teaching on this and properly exegeting the scriptures, and even opening up embryology textbooks, right? I mean, that's appropriate for a Sunday morning service to say, hey, if we're going to talk about, for example, or preach through the Psalms, and we're going to get to Psalms 139, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. You knit me together in the inward parts of my mother's womb, or Luke 1, where I just was reading with my children, where John the Baptist is in the womb and Jesus
yeah,
is in the womb, Elizabeth
yeah,
and Mary, right? And the
yeah,
babe leaps for joy in the
yeah,
womb. And, I mean, exegeting these passages from a pastoral perspective should involve a thorough assessment and examination of the science of human life and human development, of the beauty of an embryo, the beauty of our early stage of life. And I think that's just not really talked about. And I talk to pastors routinely who will say to me, Jason, I want to talk about this more. Can you help me? But it's a touchy subject in my church. We've got women who've had
Right.
these
Right.
issues, and so I think what there is now, because we've not been talking about it. Darkness festers and grows. Sin festers and grows in darkness, and that's true culturally, right? Where
Yeah.
it's not being talked about culturally, but it's even true in our churches, where there's a lot of post-abortive women who are not getting the healing and the counseling that they need because pastors are afraid to talk about it. And the Bible says perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah.
If we love those that we're called to minister to, we have to be able to say the hard things. And anyone trained in counseling, of course, knows this. You have to be able to look people in the eyes in a counseling room and tell them the hard things that they don't want to hear about themselves. And you know that may involve them getting up and walking out of your office. It may involve them saying, I don't want you to counsel me anymore. But faithfulness and love to that person means you have to be able to tell them the hard things.
Right.
And we live in a culture where nobody wants to hear hard truths, right? We live in a culture where seeker-friendly Christianity has sort of grown and arisen in conjunction with sort of the Burger King culture of your way, right away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's the marketing scheme of we're the most luxurious, the wealthiest culture that's ever existed in human history. And yet we're told by people routinely, I can't afford to have children. I can't.
Yeah.
I have to
Yeah.
have it. I have to terminate my pregnancy
Right.
because you can't afford a child. So you live in the most wealthy nation, rife and drowning in luxury and comfort and material things. If you can't afford to have children, then nobody who's ever existed for thousands of years of human
Right.
civilization should have ever
Right.
afforded that. We went to the Dominican Republic years ago, I remember, and we advocated for life there, and it was a very strong pro-life country, written into their constitution. Outrage, rarely to find anybody who supports abortion there. And I just remember going into these small villages where there are just children on dirt roads, barefoot, running up to us, and just embracing our message, happy, joyful, and
Yeah.
moms and dads coming to hear us preach and teach, and have 6, 7, 8, 9 children, and these children are full of joy, and they have very little materially, and yet they're happy, they love each other, and they're content. So we've lost a lot in this country.
Yeah.
There's a lot here to the spiritual sickness that ails us. But again, I think it goes back to the pulpits. It goes back to the fact that we're not teaching and preaching adequately on these matters. And so, the old saying, a mist in the pulpit is a fog in the pew. And
Yeah.
so the Republican Party, it shouldn't surprise us that they're wanting to run away from this issue. It shouldn't surprise us that they're not properly thinking or acting about this, and have said things like, that's just a single issue, right? You hear that, we don't
Yeah.
want to be single issue
Yeah.
voters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, my response to that is, if you think abortion is just a single issue, a single policy issue, and we're going to discuss abortion like we're debating a tax policy, then again, it goes back to what you just said. That reflects a profound ignorance about what abortion is.
Yeah.
We're talking about the killing of a human being in the womb.
Right.
So this is not just about the issue of abortion or what that may or may not be. This is about the value of human life, how we value human life in society. Do we value even the most innocent, the most helpless? Do we value people over things and comforts, right?
Right.
So it speaks to our identity and our conscience as a nation. And it also speaks to the nature of parental duty and parental responsibility. And what is the glue of society? Is it not the family? Is it not the love that is bestowed between a mother and a father, right? Their commitment to each other, their sacrifice for each other, and then to their children, right? We all know, every study confirms children thrive in an environment where mom and dad's visible love and commitment to each other is on display, and where their sacrifice and commitment to each other then is imbued into the children. And that is the glue of a healthy society, where self-sacrifice trumps all other considerations. And what we have today is we've completely reversed that, where we tell moms and dads that you can sacrifice your children
Right.
on the
Right.
altar of convenience,
Right.
and place things ahead of our own children. And the consequences for that are absolutely unbelievably destructive, right? And so there's no way we're going to have a healthy economy, right, when we have a moral and spiritual collapse going on. A healthy economy can only emerge where there's a strong moral foundation upon which to build it. And so for those that think that we can bypass these issues and that we're going to still have a healthy economic system, are deluded, sadly. And that's where we're at, sadly.
It's interesting too. It has become such a cultural norm, this issue of abortion, and the conversations around it, and it's so acceptable, right? So there was a time where abortion was not legal in our country. People came from maybe a more, um, I don't know, a time where there were some um, moral absolutes. There was some agreement on things. Then abortion came into the national discussion. It became legal through Roe, and there were people who were before Roe. They had to think about that, and then after Roe, well, now we have a generation of people, right, who have only ever known abortion as being legal, abortion as being something talked about as a social issue, abortion being talked about as a personal choice, and all of these things that we talk about now. It's become so ensconced in our culture, in our cultural dialogue, that I really believe there are, folks who don't see it as right or wrong. They see it as personal. And so, to your point earlier, we now have churches where, a percentage, I don't know what the percentage is, but a percentage of people in the churches have either had an abortion or, in the case of, men, boyfriends, et cetera, supported someone who's had an abortion. And that's just kind of part of it, right? So how do you talk to those people, right? So we say things, we make statements like, abortion is murder. And in a technical sense, it is, right? It's the premeditated taking of a life. It is murder.
Right. Yes.
And it really is. But to the person that was raised in a society and raised in a culture where it was okay and it was normal, there was a lot of family pressure to go through with this. And so without thinking, without looking at ultrasounds, they just kind of closed their eyes and did it. And then they moved on. How do you bridge that gap of conversation, right? How do you help someone who's been through this without, correct me if I'm saying this wrong, right? But without pointing a finger at someone and saying you're a murderer, right? And you need to repent. And I think some repentance needs to take place. I don't disagree with that, but how do you broach that conversation?
That's a great question. And, there's no one size fits all answer to that question. I think that a variety of approaches are needed. And, the Christian life is one that I think is about balance.
Yeah.
And as we mature and we try to become seasoned, mature men and leaders, it's a constant balancing act, right? It's, I have to balance family time with work and ministry. I have to balance, we balance the holiness of God with the mercy of God, the justice of God, with his grace and forgiveness. And so, the intellectual considerations and the academic and the scholarly pursuits with the heart things and the emotions. And so, Christianity is it's a constant act of balancing ourselves and seeking to be well-rounded. And so, I think that's then also true for a church, right? A healthy church has a robust leadership team with a diversification of gifts and personalities. And so I think it takes that kind of a team. It takes a healthy church to minister to a community. And so some of that is going to be crisis pregnancy centers that are supported, that are gospel centered, and that say the hard things, as we said, and that really bring the truth and show the reality of abortion, but that they're ministering and being that doorway and that big funnel to get moms who are in a crisis into a place where they can be loved on and cared for. And so we've helped with that, and there's times I've just went and delivered appliances or done appliance repair for a mom that's struggling and wanting to have a child now that we've talked out of having an abortion. Sometimes that's going to be learning how to articulate the issue, right? And so good pro-life apologetics, right? And that comes, again, from our pulpits and from Christians who were thinking biblically on the matter. We can articulate the issue in a gracious manner, but also in a persuasive manner, where we're able to change hearts and minds. And I've been, thankfully, by the grace of God, I've been able to go into whole rooms and change the entire room. I had many debates. I've changed probably thousands of people's minds on this issue over years of campus ministry, on the streets work, speaking in churches and in diverse environments. And there are ways that, God can use us as we equip ourselves to speak intelligently, right? We see even the Apostle Paul, he goes into the synagogues in the book of Acts, reasoning, debating, and persuading, right? And he was well studied, he was a scholar in Hebrew and was able to reason from the scriptures that Christ was in fact the Messiah, the fulfillment of these Old Testament passages with Jewish leaders in the synagogue. And so there's an aspect, I think, where we have to raise the intellectual bar in our churches and be able to, and pastors need to be teaching apologetics in general,
Yeah,
which was a
that's
big
good.
part of my conversion, as I shared, and really pro-life apologetics, and learning how to articulate the matter in a persuasive way that disarms people. Right? I think something as simple as saying, hey, you want to take women's rights away? Why do you? It's like, no. As a man, the last thing that I want to do is take any woman's rights away.
Right.
But it's a very disarming way to reframe the conversation. No, I love women. I have 8 daughters. I want to protect them, empower
Yeah.
them, and see them protected, and see them thriving in life and their giftings and their calling. And so, the last thing any pro-life Christian wants to do is take a woman's rights away. In fact, Christianity is really what was the soil that birthed, right, in the modern world, the value and respect for women, which the
Right.
ancient world, there really was not that, right? And so I think it's important that, we learn how to articulate these things. We understand how to communicate to a culture that sadly there is gross institutional decay, right? I mean when I was growing up, I didn't trust my school system. I didn't respect my school system. I knew it was a bureaucratic nightmare. It wasn't educating me. It wasn't not a system of education, right? I didn't trust the government. I knew that they were lying to me, and these are corrupt politicians. I didn't trust the media. I know that they lied and were manipulating. I didn't trust, and the family structure had broken. And then I didn't trust the church. I thought the church was just a bunch of easily manipulated people and money grubbers that took advantage of them. And
Right.
so, when you have an institutional crisis like this, when you have an absolute failure of leadership in a culture, I think the church has to be sensitive to that. And so, to your point, I think it's modeling what good, healthy relationships look like, and then being able to be that light and that example to a culture that's very broken. And so, I think our families testify. Some of the strongest ways that I know that we have been able to minister to people is people just seeing our family.
Right.
As flawed as I am as a husband and a father, which is significant. You use the word ineptitude to start the show, and I think that is a word, and I think it absolutely applies to me in a lot of areas. But I think it's just the simple, loving relationships that a Christian home should exemplify. Even as flawed as a Christian home
Right. Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
the love and the harmony and the beauty and the humility that's there, it testifies to young people. It testifies to a broken generation. Angry feminists that want to say things about me when they see my children and they see that my daughters are well loved and well protected.
Yeah.
They see that my wife is well loved and well protected. That's disarming to them. It shatters the narrative of, tear down the patriarchy and
Right.
Christianity
Right.
is
Right.
oppressive and pro-lifers are all oppressive. It's like, no, hey, that's a beautiful, thriving family that I would love to have a relationship like that.
Yeah.
Is often what we find. So, but that involves outreach. So, I guess the last thing I'd say is we've got to get out of our comfort zones, and we've got to engage people. We've got to get out of the four walls of the church, get out into the highways and the byways, as Jesus said, and be actively engaged in evangelistic work. I went through 4 years of high school. I didn't have a Christian ever share the gospel with me. And so as a result, I had a tremendous evangelistic passion when Christ transformed me. And I think we've got to rebuild the evangelistic zeal of the church and the Great Commission, and recognizing that abortion ties into the Great Commission. It is, it is a political issue. It's a social issue. It's a moral issue, but ultimately it's a spiritual issue
Right.
that emanates out of the Great Commission. The work of the church is that we rebuild men, we redeem men and women. And in that redemptive process, we redeem culture and community and society. We redeem our laws. We redeem our values, our business, our economics, our education. And Christ's redemptive work and his lordship is seen all throughout these institutions in ways that bring about human flourishing. And that's what we need today is spiritual revival, right?
Yeah, that's good, man. That's so good. One of the things I appreciate about your ministry is it's not just about standing in front of abortion clinics and doing those things. It really is what you just outlined, right? Like, how do we change the conversation? How do we educate? How do we get people on the front end to think biblically about this, to think clearly about this, and to understand the issue, right? So you need to do both things. There needs to be kind of, prevention, keep people from walking through those doors if you can, right? And that persuasion in that moment, that is a life or death conversation. But there also needs to be the long-term view of this. And one of the things that you talk about often is discipleship, and specifically discipling young men. You talked about the masculinity crisis in America. I could not agree more. Talk, if you could, for a minute about discipling young men, why that's so important to this conversation specifically.
Great question. It's huge. And really, we like to say that abortion, contrary to popular opinion, is not a woman's issue.
Yep.
It's in fact a man's issue.
Mm,
And studies bear out the fact that the overwhelming majority of women who get abortions, and you look at the reasons and the rationale behind that, overwhelmingly, there's a failure of a man in that woman's life. And God has created men to be leaders. And despite all of our gender confusion and gender gymnastics and all of the efforts to re-engineer society and re-engineer gender roles, we can't escape reality. Men were created to lead, and they will either be good leaders or bad leaders. And right now, there is an abdication of good leadership and responsibility with regards to men. And you look at what the damaging effect of that is to women. We have all-time high rates of violence against women and children in our culture right now. And so, we've been told that abortion and the liberation of women and the tearing down of the patriarchy and the secularizing of our country would lead to this moral utopia, right? It'd lead to this wonderful equality and in this wonderful utopia. And instead, what it's led to is a moral crisis where we now have the highest rates of suicide, depression, anxiety. The gender confusion of young people is off the charts. We have young people now that are getting their genitals mutilated,
right.
and 10-year-olds that don't know whether they're a boy or a girl. None of this is progress. None of this is progress. This is the result of a moral and spiritual crisis and the destruction of the moral foundations of this country. And so young men are feeling this brunt extraordinarily difficultly, in extraordinary ways. Like, for example, you look at public school, 80% of faculty in public schools are female. Mm. So boys are in a system of education for 12 years where they are surrounded by women. And so, young men need older men. They need mentors. Yeah. You look at what young men were doing 150, 250 years ago, the things that were normative for young men in this country. I use George Washington as an example, one of the heroes of our country, first president. George Washington, when he was 13 years old, was a land surveyor for the colony of Virginia. Right. So he was traveling the wilderness of Virginia, foraging, getting his own food, acquiring shelter. And by 14, he joined the military, was an officer in the military by 16, purchased a plantation, was a plantation owner and an officer in the military by 17 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you say, well, that's George Washington, but that was normative.
Right.
He wasn't an aberration in his culture. The average young man 150 years ago by 20 years old, could build his own house, grow his own food, get married, raise children, was theologically, studied, politically studied. Young men, farm boys at 14 years old could quote lengthy, excerpts from Shakespeare, could quote Latin, reading, classical literature that brought them into the deep waters of political theory and theology and philosophy and moral reasoning and ethics. And this was casual reading for farm boys in America, right?
They didn't have video games though, so.
Yeah, they didn't have video games, they didn't have screens. I mean, now your average 20-year-old, where is your average 20-year-old man at now, right? I mean, we're taught in college that 30 is the new 20.
Yeah. That
the things you would have expected a 20-year-old to do even just a generation ago, which was already a decline, now don't expect till 30. Mm. So there's a crisis of masculinity. Young men feel it, and young men are rebelling against it. This is where a lot of the angst and the anger and the rise, of course, punk rock music and gangster rap music, these things are all pushing back. Young men trying to find their way in a culture that is suffocating their masculinity and telling them that their testosterone is evil. Yeah. And so what that's doing then is it's destroying all good masculine virtue. Young men no longer see themselves as protectors of women and children. And now they have become predators upon women and children. And of course, the proliferation of the porn industry has just made this problem, substantially worse, which we're only really seeing the tip of the iceberg of how deep-rooted the porn crisis is going to be for young men when you have 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds addicted to pornography across our nation. And not just, a woman in lingerie or Playboy centerfold. Yeah. Some of the stuff when we were kids, we're talking about hardcore pornography that is just filled with violence and all types of bizarre sexual things that, we're only again beginning to see the tip of the iceberg on that, and the destruction that is raining down upon our young boys. And so we're in a crisis. The good thing is that people are seeing it, and young men, I think, are hungry for answers and for truth. And what an opportunity for the church. What an opportunity for men like ourselves to step into the lives of young men and to speak truth to them, right? You think of a football coach, right? They're young men that want the hard message. They want to be challenged. They want to be told, go run a mile, go hit some push-ups, go hit the gym, stand up, turn off the video games, stop the fake substitute for being a hero, and be a real hero in real life.
Right.
Pick up your cross, deny yourself, follow Christ, and realize that the Christian life is one of tremendous adventure, that Jesus calls us to be soldiers and warriors on the spiritual battlefield. And what could be more exciting than that? Why in the world would you go play a video game? What a cheap substitute and imitation for that, right? I mean, you can go be a real hero, fight real evil, liberate people, and be a freedom fighter for Christ. And so young men, I think, are starting to hear that message. They want that message, and they want to be good, strong, responsible men. It's a matter of us as older men providing the channels and the avenues and the wisdom for them to get there. And I think we can see an actual revival of masculinity in our culture that would have a leveling effect upon so many of our social ills.
Man, that is so good. So well put, man. That's man, yeah. It's funny how we focus on some of these issues, like so myopically, right? Like that's the issue. But really it's getting back to God's intent for mankind, and specifically for men to be men, to lead their homes, to love their families well. And when that happens, everything changes. And that's it's amazing. I heard this week Mark Manson. I don't know if you know him. He's an author. He's written, not a Christian at all, right? But he's a best-selling author, speaks on business and cultural stuff and whatever. But he was talking about how outside of the church now, that this has always been a religious conversation, it's always been a church conversation about the importance of two-parent homes and the impact that has on society, and how even outside of the church now, this is not a Christian, right? Outside of the church, culture is starting to understand the importance of that. But really, it's getting back to what God intended and getting back to what God outlined for us. Man, thank you for what you're doing. Where can people follow you, learn more about you, but specifically Operation Save America, get involved in what you guys are doing, and at the very least, support what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. OperationSaveAmerica.org is our website. We have a YouTube channel, Operation Save America. My kids run our Instagram and other pages, Facebook. So OperationSaveAmerica.org.com was hijacked by pro-abortion groups that harass us. We get, there's a lot of witches that follow us around, and they have OSA, Operation Save Abortion. And there's you get some opposition when you take on these fights, but that's a good thing, right? Christ was persecuted. So OperationSaveAmerica.org. We actually have our national conference just next week in Orlando, Florida. Right. So next week, from the 22nd to the 26th, we're going to be in Florida doing a 4-day conference, working to defeat Amendment 4, which is a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Florida to enshrine abortion up to 9 months in the state constitution of Florida. $70 million has been poured into the state of Florida by pro-abortion groups from around the nation to put that on the ballot. It's an uphill fight, and we've been on the ground there trying to mobilize the church and working with a lot of good people around the state of Florida. Thankful for the leadership of Governor Ron DeSantis down there. He's just doing a phenomenal job setting the standard. He's not running away from the abortion issue at all. He's taking it head on, making the case for life, and we're winning. The polls are showing favorable numbers for us down there, but they're going to be dropping $20 to $30 million in these last 2 weeks on massive propaganda and ad campaigns. And Florida is one of about 7 states that have the similar bills going on, similar constitutional amendments. Actually 11 states, but 7 that are red or red-leaning states that are going to be voting to enshrine abortion into their state constitution. And just to speak on this for just a brief moment, this, I believe, is going to determine the spiritual trajectory of our nation for the next generation.
Yeah.
These amendment fights right now, this vote in November, if we lose all these amendments, and we're talking about states like Missouri, South Dakota, Arizona, Nebraska, Florida, if we lose all those states and abortion becomes enshrined into the state constitution of those states, our nation is in deep, deep trouble. conversely, if we win, if the church can mobilize in these states and we can win,
Yep.
that's going to be a rebuke to the Republican Party that said, "Hey, we're distancing ourselves," and it's going to be a rebuke to the nation, and it's going to be a rally cry to Christians that there's a pathway to win on this issue politically, and to see protection for preborn children established in our nation. So, and that's in the hands of the church right now. Will the church in Missouri and Arizona, South Dakota, Montana, these are the states, Florida, for pastors or people that are involved in, you live in any one of those states, please pay attention to what's going on there, get involved. A little bit everybody doing a little bit gets a lot done. And it's all hands on deck, literally, but crucial. I mean, just absolutely crucial for the future of our country. But Florida, Ron DeSantis is doing an amazing job. Unlike any other governor that I'm seeing, he's doing an amazing work. So we have a conference in Orlando, the 22nd through the 26th. We're going to have hundreds of Christians there. We're going to be knocking doors, distributing literature. We'll have prayer rallies at the abortion clinics in the morning, and we're going to have a lineup of great speakers and teachers, and doing a lot of training and helping people get equipped to think rightly in this issue and to do this work. And so if you're in Florida or around Florida, or if you want to travel to Florida, come join us in Orlando. Go to operationsafamerica.org, and you can see all those details on there.
Awesome. Jason Storms, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you for what you guys are doing, and man, keep it up. It's to say this is an important issue is a huge understatement. This is a critical. It's vital, right? It's life. My son is 23. He has been married for just over a year, I guess about a year and a half, and they're expecting their first child. And
Praise God.
It's been fun to go through this process with them, right? And to see all the ultrasounds. But even, I think back, my oldest is 24. So think back 24 years, the technology we had, I think we had one ultrasound and it wasn't that good, right? And that's what we had. But I mean, at I think 6 weeks they had an ultrasound, and they've had one every couple of weeks since then. And to just watch this baby develop is amazing. And the thought that one could see that and decide to end that life is absurd to me. But man, thank you for what you guys are doing. Really appreciate it.
I can call you Grandpa now, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm trying to stay away from that as long as possible. It makes me feel old, but
my oldest is 21, so I got a couple of my older ones that are relationships. We'll see. Ready to get to that phase. We have 11, so our youngest is 8, just turned 10 months actually. So we're maybe our last. I'm ready to move to the
man, that's
space.
incredible.
We got a big family.
You're still in it, but we're moving into a new phase of life for sure, and we're proud of them obviously, and thankful for what God's doing in their lives. But it's awesome. But thank you for what you're doing. Really appreciate it, man. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Awesome, love it, appreciate it, brother, and bless the work that you're doing. Thanks for having me on.
Again, extremely grateful for that conversation. And man, I'm always kind of attracted to people that are thoughtful, articulate, know what they're talking about, know how to explain what they're talking about. And Jason is exactly that, man. So thankful for that conversation. And I know this will warrant conversations in the future. But really understanding how to address issues like abortion, such a critical issue. And I mentioned this, I think, in the interview. But in my life, when I look at our political landscape, this is the most important issue to me. And there are a lot of other important issues. But if you don't care about life, or you're fuzzy on how we should treat the unborn and how we should value life, those created in the image of God, then the rest of it's going to fall flat as well. This is the kind of non-negotiable for me. And I am very grateful for Jason, the work that they're doing at Operation Save America. And man, go back, listen to the episode, share this with others. I think it's encouraging. I think it's helpful. And go to their website as well. Make sure you go to the right website. And you mentioned this in the show as well. But I really appreciate that. So please share that out. Again, if you have not yet subscribed to the show, go ahead and subscribe. Very important that you do that. And then take some time to go to lifeaudio.com, Life Audio, where you'll find this podcast and many other great podcasts and conversations, people of faith speaking to so many of these very important issues. I encourage you to go there as well. Thank you again for listening, and I will encourage you with this thought. I try to do it every week. Sometimes I forget, but today I will encourage you with this thought. When life is blowing up around you, and so often that happens when it seems like the enemy's bullets are coming your direction, you only have two choices. You can decide to stay where you are and die. You can do that. Make a decision to just stay stuck, not moving forward. Or you can do the better thing. And that thing is to march. So hard, so often, but put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward. Again, thank you. Look forward to talking to you next time.